Archetypes are the foundational pillars upon which the universe is built. Archetypes are spirits, they have consciousness, and we engage and interact with these spirits through opening up to our own deeper self. Archetypes are much more than constructs. And what sometimes happens today is that the term archetype is used as a definition. So we could have the archetype of the witch, for example. She can be a crone or a seductress, and that is a description, a definition of a construct. Archetypes are much more primordial than that. And an understanding of some of the foundational archetypal forces will completely change the lens through which you experience both the everyday world and the unseen deeper world. The two basic archetypes are anima and animus. And as I go into this kind of exploration of anima and animus, keep in mind that there are many variations of anima and animus, many combinations of anima and animus. And this is not to speak in a way of understanding uh, gender roles or stereotypes or anything that is harmful and negative. It is just these terms, anima and animus, define the two underlying forces of which everything else is made. It's part of this. They are, the threads that run through all things. In my teaching, I focus quite a bit on anima, anima mundi, and Hekate in this role of world soul. The fuel that runs through all of creation and destruction. So that is the prime archetype that I explore in my body of work. That is not to say that animus, which is the prime masculine archetype, doesn't exist. It is to say that the source, the origin, is the feminine principle, and the masculine principle, the animus, comes along to balance anima. And we can think of the anima and animus in terms of the archetypes of the moon and the sun. Now, in different cultures, the moon can be it can be animus or anim. They can play different roles to a certain extent. In my teaching, the moon is anima. It is the feminine principle, and the sun is animus. Although, of course, this can change given what spirits you're experiencing and your own unique knowledge. But in general, the moon is anima. The moon is about the inner life, the deeper self, and the sun is about illumination and creation and the outward self, our personas that we put on to navigate the world, for example. And personas often are connected to deeper archetypes, the mother, the worker, the friend, and so on. Sometimes, we put on these personas, and we also put on personas like outfits to help us navigate the world. So personas certainly exist in the outer self and not just in the inner self. The archetypes work in every aspect of our lives. So anima and animus, in some teachings, animus is about projection, and anima is about receptivity. Now, again, this is not about gender roles. This is about the yin and yang, if you're familiar with that concept of all things. And us as individuals are comprised of both. So that when we focus on anima, we also are acknowledging the existence of animus, because they are, they are one and the same to a certain extent. So those are the two primal archetypes. And the goal of the journey in life is the unification of these two archetypes within us as we break down this illusion of separation, so that we can see that the surface self and the deeper self is this sort of marriage, represented by the Lover's card in Tarot. And when there is a problem in this realm, we often see the Devil card come out, because the devil is coming to us to say, well, you need to work on this unification. There is some things going on here. And that is another archetype, right? The archetype of the devil. So when we start to explore the world through an archetypal lens, it removes this kind of right and wrongness from things. The archetypes exist, and we, as seekers of wholeness and of the deeper self and of unification with the goddess, with Hekate, with Anima Mundi, that we experience these archetypes and embody these archetypes. And seeing the world through an archetypal perspective allows us to become curious and open about our experiences in everyday life, our dreams, our imaginations, the synchronicities we experience, and the symbolic language of archetypes. Archetypes sometimes speak in concrete language. Some of us have had experiences, for example, of Hekate, Anima Mundi, the Prima archetype, speaking to us very directly, perhaps sardonically even. But she often is speaking, even when she's using words, it's symbolic, and it's left for us to fully experience what she's talking about by journaling it, perhaps drawing it out, sitting with it, going for a walk, and letting it rest with us. And in this way, the archetypes work on us as much as we work with them, because they have a consciousness, they have a will, they have desires just as much as we do. So there is this interaction between us and the archetypes. So some of the most basic archetypes that can be helpful to use as a lens for interpreting yourself and understanding others and connecting to the deeper world are the planetary archetypes, particularly of the original Sacred Seven. So I encourage you to explore astrology, especially focusing on the meaning of the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, until you get a good grip on what those Sacred Seven mean. Exploring the archetypes of the elements, earth, air, fire, and water, will also really broaden the landscape for you and the way you can interpret the world. There are archetypes that are kind of connected to embodied spirits. I've already talked about Hecate as Anima Mundi, and then we can see Animus in all of his many forms. So if we understand the Sacred Seven Planets, we see Mercury as a representation of Animus. So that is the communicator, the journeyer, a little bit of a trickster vibe, because we don't want to get bored on our journey. And then we see Jupiter, the regal one, and expansiveness. And we see Saturn as the one that pulls us into ourselves, into really going in deep to the mysteries, almost in a way that it is like a black sun that takes us into places within ourselves that we may be frightened of. There are aspects of ourselves that can be quite terrifying to us. So you can see that we can start to explore animus through the planets. You know, the trickster, the dark god, and so on. And certainly Hecate represents many different uh, archetypes of anima, or flavors of anima, if you will. The dark mother, you know, whose darkness is so deep that she can take all of our darkness. You know, she is Babora Forma, the filth eater in that aspect. And then we can also see this, the archetypal energies of different deities. Persephone as, you know, the queen of the underworld, the one who learned to rule over her prison with grace and authority. And that is very reflective of anima and the inward downward journey. So it's not to say that only a woman would have this archetype within them and be able to connect to this archetype for healing, but it is about the inward journey into the self. So you can see how starting to see, you know, the planets, the elements, the deities that you connect with as archetypes, and how they are represented within you and how they come to you as healing, as your true medicine. And that if you are a person who practices magic, you cast spells and so on, that you work with these archetypes in magic. And ultimately, archetypes will always remain mysterious. Again, if you loop back to where I said an archetype is not a construct, an archetype is so fundamental that, you know, we can swim down through the river to the river underneath to connect with deeper layers of the archetype. Yet most of the time, the soul essence of the archetype can remain very elusive to us. And this is why our experiences of archetypes that are truly numinous, which means very transcendent, very sacred, are so difficult to put into words. And this is where it becomes so helpful to just let your creativity go, to make a drawing. It doesn't, you know, you don't have to be an artist, just draw it out or create something or do a search for images to connect with something that comes to you in such a symbolic lexicon. Other archetypes that can be very helpful to explore, of course, is the archetype of the witch, the archetype of the maiden, you know, the beginner, the Nissa, the archetype of the crone, the wise older woman, the archetype of the sage, you know, the sage, the wise older woman kind of scares the truth into you. The sage is more about wise counsel rather than this deep kind of earth shattering. The sage leads you where you need to go in a very different way than the crone does. The puer puella, the eternal child, in all of its aspects, because of course archetypes have both shadow and we'll call it truth. So shadow is the darker aspects, which, you know, we typically think of darkness as things that are challenging, difficult, frightening, things that hold our wounds. So all archetypes have a shadow aspect, and then they have what could be called an illuminated aspect or a truer aspect. But this kind of confuses the issue because the shadow is just as true as the illuminated aspects. So when you explore archetypes, adopt that lens. Like, is this a shadow archetype, a shadow aspect of the archetype? Is this an illuminated? And sometimes we use the language light and dark, but there is a connotation in our society that dark, of course, is bad and light is good, which, of course, this isn't true at all, especially in the archetypal world. What is of the shadow can be just as healing and is, in fact, more so than what is illuminated, because it's the shadows where the healing abides. So when we think of this, a shadow and truth, we're kind of denying that the shadow is just as true as illuminated aspects. So go into that exploration of, what is illuminated and what is shadow within yourself and the archetypes that you connect to. So we have archetypes: maiden, mother, crone, youth, adult, elder. We have archetypes of masculine and feminine, archetypes of the planet, archetypes of the different deities. There's so many archetypes for us to experience. The child archetype can be the wounded child. It could be the neglected child. It could be the golden child who never had a chance, to make any mistakes because they were always elevated on a throne. So there are many ways to interact with archetypes. And to see yourself through an archetypal lens will fundamentally change how you not only see yourself, but see the world. And it really, really will amplify your ability to connect to the deeper self and, to the pure world of spirit.